What would happen if, overnight, the US dollar, the symbol of American power, collapsed completely? Life savings would vanish. Prices for food, housing, and fuel would skyrocket tenfold. States would plunge into chaos, overwhelmed by unemployment, riots, and rampant poverty. When the USD loses its global dominance, Americans wouldn't just lose their wealth, they'd lose their future. Welfare programs would crumble. The stock market would crash uncontrollably. Major cities, once magnificent, would decay into desolate, abandoned wastelands. And the biggest question, in such a scenario, who could possibly remain standing? Join me as we explore the 10 most devastating consequences that would strike America if the USD falls, starting now. Number 1, hyperinflation tsunami. When the US dollar collapses, silence won't be the first thing that hits. It'll be a tidal wave of hyperinflation sweeping across America faster than anyone can react. Because the dollar is the world's reserve currency, its value directly influences the price of goods and services nationwide. The moment it plummets, purchasing power evaporates and prices explode. Think of it like this. The loaf of bread you buy for $2 today could cost $10, $20, even $50 in just a few months. It's no longer about tightening your belt. It's about fighting to survive in a storm of uncontrollable price surges. History has already shown us how this plays out. In the 1920s, Germany's Weimar Republic faced hyperinflation so severe that prices doubled every 3 to 4 days. People pushed wheelbarrows of cash just to buy a loaf of bread. But if the US dollar collapses, a currency far more powerful than the German mark ever was, the disaster would be exponentially worse. And the reasons are clear. A weakened dollar means skyrocketing import costs from raw materials to daily essentials like food, gas, and clothing. But what's worse is how deeply the US economy relies on global supply chains. From Walmart to your neighborhood corner store, the majority of goods are imported. A devalued dollar would turn everyday necessities into unaffordable luxuries. On top of that, domestic inflation would spiral. As American producers face rising costs for materials and transportation, they'll be forced to raise prices to stay afloat. A self-perpetuating cycle of inflation begins, driving costs higher and higher until they spiral beyond control. And who suffers first? The working class, those living on fixed wages, retirees relying on savings or Social Security. When basic goods become a financial burden and your dollar loses value by the day, millions of American families will be pushed into poverty, despair, and hopelessness. Inflation doesn't just drain your wallet, it drains your faith. And in a society where people lose faith in the value of their currency, social stability becomes a mirage. The real question is, has America prepared for this doomsday scenario, or are we all just sitting on a powder keg, waiting for the inevitable explosion? Number 2, skyrocketing living costs, plummeting real income. You don't need a total dollar collapse to feel the pain. Even a significant drop in value can quietly erode every dollar in your pocket. The harsh truth is this: when everything you need becomes more expensive each day, your paycheck, no matter how consistent, feels smaller and smaller. Living costs like rent, utilities, food, healthcare, and education won't just rise, they'll spike. According to the U.S. Department of Labor, the average national rent rose 6.5% in 2024, double the pace of wage growth. And that's during normal conditions. Imagine what happens if the dollar crashes. Take this real-world example. A 2-bedroom apartment in suburban Houston currently rents for $1,500 a month. In a weakened dollar scenario, that figure could shoot up to $2,500 or even $3,000 in just months. The same goes for electric bills, fuel, healthcare premiums. Everything would surge, pushing monthly living expenses beyond the grasp of the average household. The scary part? Incomes won't keep up. Faced with recession and rising operational costs, companies won't increase salaries. Instead, they'll freeze wages, cut jobs, or hire part-time workers to save money. Workers will find themselves stuck in a brutal paradox, working harder, earning less. Real income, meaning the actual purchasing power of your paycheck, will collapse. A $60,000 annual salary before the crisis might feel like $30,000 once prices explode, and those living on minimum wage or welfare? Their reality becomes a choice between skipping meals, selling off possessions, or ending up homeless. And the middle class, the so-called backbone of the American economy, they'll take the hardest hit. With mortgages, car payments, student loans, insurance premiums, and more, their financial structure depends on stability. When living costs exceed income, their collapse triggers a chain reaction: reduced consumer spending, small business closures, frozen housing markets, and eventually, a total economic downturn. In that world, the American dream of stability, progress, and prosperity vanishes without a trace. So the real question remains: does America still have time to mend the cracks rapidly spreading through its economic and social foundation? Or have we already strayed too far down a path of no return? Number 3, soaring interest rates, crippling borrowing costs. As the dollar collapses, the Federal Reserve will be left with few choices, one of which is hiking interest rates in a last-ditch effort to restore faith in the currency and prevent a mass exodus from U.S. financial markets. But in trying to win back global trust, the price American citizens will pay is brutal. Borrowing will become devastatingly expensive. Let's be clear, the American economy runs on credit. Mortgages, auto loans, credit cards, business loans all rely on accessible, low-interest borrowing. When interest rates skyrocket, the cost of borrowing becomes a nightmare. Freddie Mac data shows that average mortgage rates hovered around 7% in 2024. If the dollar crashes, we could see rates hit 10%, 12%, even 15%. A $300,000 mortgage at 7% costs about $2,000 a month. At 12%, that figure jumps to nearly $3,100, a jump that would push millions of families beyond their financial breaking point. It's not just the housing market. Daily spending habits would be strangled too. Credit card interest rates, already averaging 20% at the end of 2024, could soar to 30% or higher. A $5,000 credit card balance, if left unpaid, could balloon into an unpayable debt mountain in just a few months. Americans, so used to buy now, pay later, will find there's nowhere left to turn. For small businesses, the situation is even bleaker. With credit access drying up, expansion, survival, or even day-to-day operations become impossible. Local shops, family-run restaurants, small manufacturers, the backbone of American communities, will collapse one by one under crushing financial pressure. According to the National Small Business Association, NSBA, a mere 3% interest rate hike forces nearly 47% of small businesses to cut staff or scale down. If rates spiral after a dollar collapse, the fallout won't just be financial. It'll mean millions of job losses, foreclosures, and shattered futures. And don't forget local and state governments. Many rely on issuing bonds to fund infrastructure, healthcare, and education. As borrowing costs surge, so will the need for budget cuts, public service closures, and further societal instability. In short, in a world where the dollar crashes, borrowing, once the engine of American growth, becomes a deadly burden. Progress stalls, society slows, entire sectors freeze in fear of what's next. And when the cost of borrowing becomes a wall no one can climb, will the American dream still stand, or will it crumble into a pile of financial ruin that the public is forced to silently endure? Number 4, stock market crash, wealth evaporation. The fall of the US dollar won't just shake the real economy. It could ignite a full-blown financial catastrophe in the American stock market. The moment the dollar shows signs of devaluation, a wave of panic selling will ripple through Wall Street like wildfire. Unlike typical recessions, a currency-driven crisis strikes at the very core of investor confidence. And because the stock market is built on expectations and trust in the future, it will likely be the first to fall. As foreign investors pull out to escape the risks of a weakened dollar, major indexes like the Dow Jones, S&P 500, and NASDAQ could experience a free fall. Imagine trillions of dollars in market value evaporating in just weeks. During the 2008 crash, the S&P 500 lost 57% of its value in 17 months. If the dollar collapses, a 60 to 70% drop in just a few months is not out of the question. The devastation wouldn't stop at institutional investors. Everyday Americans who've poured life savings into 401ks, IRAs, or direct stock investments would watch their assets disappear overnight. According to the Investment Company Institute, more than 58% of U.S. adults own stocks, directly or indirectly. So when the market crashes, it won't just hit the wealthy. It will strike the middle and working classes hard. Public pension funds won't be spared either. Many states and municipalities have invested heavily in the stock market, hoping for returns amid low interest rates. When the markets crash, these funds will face severe shortfalls, putting retirees at risk of losing benefits and economic security. Worse still, panic will spill into other markets: corporate bonds, real estate, cryptocurrencies. A full-blown economic downturn will be triggered, and unlike previous recessions, this time there may be no safe haven for investors to retreat to. The scariest part? A stock market collapse isn't just about lost money. It brings layoffs, as companies lose capital and cut workers. It depresses consumer spending, as Americans tighten their budgets, triggering a long-term economic spiral. The painful question must be asked: when decades of hard-earned wealth vanish in an instant, what will keep the American people from turning to rage, despair, and chaos? Number 5. Slashed social welfare. While many focus on personal losses or market chaos during a dollar collapse, a quieter but more devastating threat lurks: the unraveling of America's social safety net. Programs like unemployment insurance, food assistance, SNAP, Medicaid, and Social Security rely directly on the federal budget, which is primarily funded by taxes, especially from personal income and corporations. When a dollar crash causes mass unemployment and economic contraction, tax revenues plummet. The budget falls into crisis. According to the Congressional Budget Office, CBO, Social Security alone accounted for over 23% of federal spending in 2023, around $1.4 trillion. If revenues dry up, the government will have no choice but to reduce or delay benefit payments. In practical terms, retirees may receive smaller checks than promised. The unemployed may face longer waits or smaller benefits. Low-income individuals could struggle to access medical care, and families already living on the edge might lose food stamps altogether. A 20 to 30% cut to key welfare programs could instantly push millions into hunger, homelessness, and medical insecurity. The most vulnerable, children, the elderly, and the disabled, will suffer first and most. This domino effect would be catastrophic: rising homelessness, increased crime from desperation, disease outbreaks due to lack of care, and the return of slum-like conditions in major cities, echoing the Great Depression of the 1930s. A Pew Research survey shows over 63% of Americans rely on at least one government program. When benefits are slashed, even the middle class will feel the squeeze. And as frustration grows, peaceful discontent may turn to protest, or worse, riots, mass demonstrations, and civil disobedience could erupt as citizens feel betrayed by the very system meant to protect them. A nation without a reliable safety net is a nation teetering on collapse. The real question becomes: how long can society hold together when basic support systems fall apart? Number 6. Surging unemployment, business closures. Even without full-scale collapse, the weakening of the dollar can unleash a brutal wave of business closures and mass unemployment. A sharp decline in purchasing power forces companies into survival mode, slashing budgets, halting hiring, and eventually closing doors. The weakened dollar inflates the cost of imported goods and raw materials. For globally dependent industries, retail, manufacturing, tech, profit margins erode fast. Businesses are left with two harsh choices: raise prices and risk losing customers, or cut costs by laying off employees. In an economy where prices rise but consumer spending falls, small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs, which make up 99.9% of all U.S. businesses, per the SBA, will be hit hardest. Unable to absorb costs or pass them on, many will simply collapse. The clearest result: skyrocketing unemployment. Sectors like manufacturing, retail, logistics, and food services will be the first to shed jobs. But the pain won't stop there. As core industries fall, ripple effects will strike housing, tech, finance, and beyond. Picture this: one factory closes. Its workers lose jobs. Local suppliers, delivery services, nearby diners all take the hit. Whole neighborhoods and towns go silent, literally, as work disappears. During the 2008 crisis, unemployment peaked at 10%. In a weakened dollar scenario with runaway inflation and no recovery momentum, experts warn it could reach 15 to 20%, on par with the Great Depression. Even companies still afloat will panic. To protect themselves, they'll shutter branches, cut headcount, or shift operations overseas. Job losses will spread coast to coast, from major cities to struggling rural towns. The American people, who once believed they lived in the most stable economy on earth, will confront a brutal truth: no jobs, no safety net, and no clear future. Number 7. Erosion of confidence in the financial system. In a dollar-based economy, the collapse of the dollar triggers more than just financial losses. It shatters public faith in the entire financial system. As the dollar loses value, banks, investment firms, and markets suffer rapid asset devaluation. Panic spreads. People begin to question whether their money is truly safe. Investors and depositors grow suspicious of institutions they once trusted. If the collapse persists, millions will watch helplessly as their savings vanish. Bank accounts, stock portfolios, even real estate and gold, all will feel the tremors. For those raised to trust the system, the emotional and psychological toll will be immense. Faith in the financial system, already shaken by the 2008 meltdown, will erode rapidly. Banks may face runs as panicked customers withdraw cash en masse, leading to widespread instability. The transparency and competence of America's financial leadership will be called into question. In a world that no longer trusts the dollar, trillions of dollars in wealth will become meaningless numbers on a screen. Banks will struggle to stay afloat, and without public confidence, economic recovery will stall. Worse, this fear will prompt extreme responses: higher banking fees, restricted credit, sudden interest rate hikes, all of which make borrowing harder for families and businesses. As confidence evaporates, Americans will seek alternatives: cryptocurrency, precious metals, offshore accounts. But this flight from traditional finance will breed chaos, distorting investment and consumption patterns. A recent Gallup poll revealed that only 19% of Americans trusted the financial system after the 2008 crash. When the dollar collapses, that number could plunge into the single digits, sparking an exodus from legacy finance and accelerating national economic decay. The key question then becomes, can the U.S. economy remain stable without public trust, or are we headed for an unprecedented collapse? Number 8. Loss of USD's global reserve currency status. For decades, the US dollar has been the world's dominant currency, used in trade, held in reserves, and trusted globally. But if it collapses, the consequences won't stop at America's borders. They'll ripple across the entire planet. Most countries hold a significant portion of their foreign reserves in US dollars due to its stability and America's global influence. But if the dollar depreciates severely, nations will look for safer alternatives, posing an existential threat to U.S. financial dominance. If the dollar is no longer the world's reserve currency, global trade will shift toward alternatives like the euro, Chinese yuan, or even gold and digital currencies. Even a partial shift would cause massive devaluation and capital flight. The result? U.S. companies would face rising exchange rate risks, international trade would slow, the U.S. could lose competitive advantage in key sectors, businesses would face higher costs and more complexity in global transactions. Worse, America's ability to borrow would shrink. Without reserve status, U.S. bonds become riskier. Interest rates soar, inflation spikes, a sovereign debt crisis could follow as the U.S. struggles to raise money without cheap credit. Developing nations, many of which rely heavily on the dollar, would be thrown into turmoil. Their economies could crash as they scramble to stabilize reserves and restructure trade relationships. As countries pivot away from the dollar, a new currency war could emerge. But replacing the dollar isn't easy. It takes a stable economy, a trusted government, and a resilient financial system. Still, the symbolic blow to U.S. global power would be severe. In short, losing reserve status wouldn't just weaken the dollar. It could unravel the entire post-WY2 financial order and send the global economy into years of uncertainty and fragility. Number 9. Soaring energy import costs. The U.S. heavily relies on energy imports, especially oil and natural gas, to fuel its economy. A collapsing dollar would make those imports drastically more expensive, sparking a chain reaction of economic pain. Global energy is priced in dollars. When the dollar falls, oil-producing nations may demand payment in euros, yuan, or gold. U.S. energy costs skyrocket. For American consumers and businesses, this means higher gas, heating, and electricity bills. Industrial sectors like manufacturing, construction, and transportation would suffer huge production cost spikes, triggering even more inflation. Families would be forced to cut spending on essentials like food, healthcare, and education. The energy burden would deepen inequality, hitting low-income households the hardest. High energy prices also erode American competitiveness. U.S. goods become more expensive, exports decline, and industries lose market share overseas. Sectors like airlines, freight, and logistics may collapse under fuel price pressure. Companies pass those costs to consumers, further dampening demand and accelerating economic contraction. Government efforts to subsidize energy or transition to renewables may falter under budget stress, leaving both households and businesses stranded. And when people can't afford to keep the lights on, unrest grows. Protests, labor strikes, and wage demands escalate, reflecting deep frustration with rising costs and stagnant wages. Ultimately, expensive energy is more than an economic inconvenience. It's a threat to national stability. Number 10. Rising social and political instability. When an economy suffers a severe shock like a dollar collapse, the fallout goes beyond balance sheets. It strikes at the heart of social and political cohesion. Runaway inflation, wage stagnation, and financial insecurity widen societal cracks. As costs rise and real incomes fall, ordinary people feel powerless, setting the stage for unrest. The wealth gap deepens. Working-class Americans face crushing pressure while the wealthy shield themselves with investments. This fuels resentment and sharpens class divisions. When welfare fails and unemployment rises, citizens lose faith in government. Protests demanding wage hikes, tax relief, and reform will grow louder and more intense. Political polarization will skyrocket as parties blame one another for the crisis. Gridlock worsens. Elections become battlegrounds. Confidence in leadership erodes. Extremist ideologies gain traction. Some may resort to violence. Riots, strikes, and radical movements could become everyday occurrences. The legal system, media, and civil liberties may face strain as governments struggle to maintain order. Increased surveillance, speech restrictions, and forceful policing may follow. Without swift, decisive action, the U.S. could descend into a cycle of instability where no institution, economic, political, or social, is immune. The fallout from a USD collapse would not only disrupt the economy, but fundamentally reshape America's social fabric. Soaring inflation, escalating living costs, rampant unemployment, and social unrest would pose severe challenges, particularly for vulnerable groups. Restoring trust in the financial system and ensuring social stability is an immensely complex task. While a USD collapse would unleash unpredictable consequences, recovery remains possible with timely, effective interventions. However, addressing this crisis demands bold, sustainable strategies from the government and leaders. Ultimately, we can only hope America finds a path through this challenge. But if it doesn't, the result would be a protracted crisis affecting not just the economy, but every citizen directly impacted. The information in this analysis is hypothetical and for illustrative purposes only. We cannot predict the economy's future or specific events with certainty. All investment decisions or actions should be based on careful evaluation and advice from financial experts.